Welcome to the Blum Computer Consulting Monthly Webinar Series. You are sure in for a treat today. I'm pleased to introduce to you Greg Tisdale, a new member of our team, but a seasoned veteran with Sage products. He is our new Sage 100 practice lead, and if you ask me, an enormous asset to our group. And before I hand the mic off to Greg, if you have any questions during the webinar, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Go ahead and throw your questions in there. I'll either interrupt Greg if it's pertinent, or we'll just answer them all at the end. So, with that, the reason you're all here, archiving, purging, and backups. Greg, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Appreciate everyone giving up some time today to join us in this, what I hope is a informative and an important topic, archiving, purging. It tends to be something that's last on our list, but it is something that if we do, on an annual basis or on a relatively frequent basis, we can kind of keep ahead of the game and keep our system running lean and mean. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. The question on everyone's mind, I'm sure, is why purge? So storing everything is not an effective information governance practice, and it may be the reason for slowing down your ERP application software, increasing your costs, increasing time for things such as maintenance activities, upgrading, patching, backup discovery, and or cloning. So there are some benefits to keeping your system lean. The thing that we have to consider in doing this is determining what the retention period is based on your individual business requirements and processes and or policies as well. So we need to decide, do we want to keep 3 years, 5 years? That's something that you'll have to make that decision with your internal team, based simply on maybe 7 years based on IRS requirements. Maybe general ledger stays 7 years, but inventory, sales order, purchase order is 3 years. So that's something that needs to be decided. The next thing to consider in the process of purging is determine whether you would like to purge, archive, or both. My recommendation is both. I tend to be on the conservative side, so I like to do a archive company. And additionally, before I start the purging process, I do like to make an actual backup of my Mass 90 folder, so my full Sage installation, or at the very least, just the company. And I'll just show you what I mean by that in a minute. So what is your timing on running the purge? Well, we want to determine a time where you can run the utilities during an off-peak hours. Some of the purges take longer than others. And it all depends on how much history you have and how much we're going to remove. But you do want to allot enough time for yourselves to complete the purging process, because the recommendation and will always be to have users out of the system during that process. That being said, if we are going to create new companies, if we're going to our historical backup company, and we're also going to have enough space to do a backup, we have to ensure that we have enough disk space. That's something that you can reach out to your internal IT or your outside IT or even one of our VBCC consultants, and we can help you determine if you have enough space. And I also will say that we can help you in the process, because some of this might be a little more technical than you want to get into. I did want to note that Sage doesn't have an automatic archiving process, and Sage doesn't back itself up. And we'll talk about backups at the end, but I do want to present that to you at this time, that we don't do automatic archiving and we don't have an automatic backup process. So that's something to be, considered. The thing with purging is purging may not speed up processes. So you may not notice a great change in, let's say, posting invoices, for instance. However, you should see after purging some improvements in reporting, your lookups, your Explorer views, if you use Explorer views, BIE reports. So anything that is calling the data should be improved based on the purging process. So you do see an immediate, or there should be an immediate performance improvement. Excuse me. So once you've determined what the retention period is going to be, then we want to look at, well, let's make a historical backup. So we want to make an archive. So we've determined that we're going to do 3 years, or maybe it's 5 years, but in any event, it makes sense for us to do a backup, which is a historical backup. So it becomes an archive company, and I'm calling it a backup because I do it as a company copy. Now, not everyone will have permissions to do this. Some of you will, some of you might not. And this is to do a company copy, create a new company and copy a company. But I do want to show you the process. If you don't have permissions, we can certainly help. It's just a couple-minute process, doesn't take long. I mean, and it's something that we definitely can help with. So where do I do a company copy? Well, in your library master module, under main, company maintenance, this is where we add companies, and this is where we're going to also do our company copy. So the naming convention for the company, because in the past we didn't have a way to identify whether a company is a live company, a test company, archive company. We used to use a naming convention. Maybe we used H with the year, maybe we did Y with the year, and some people would like to do Z, so that the archive company or historical company was always at the bottom of the list. Well, in newer versions of Sage, we can identify what type of company it is. So we can identify that it is a archive. So let's say, for instance, I want to do my historical 2024. So I'm going to create my historical backup. I can type here, override. And then here I can go ahead and say this is going to be a archive company. And then what I typically do before doing the actual copy is I'm going to go ahead and save the record. And then I'm going to bring it back up. So let me go grab my historical company. All right. Now, when I copy, it is preferred, but not required that the company you're copying from, that all users are out. That just will speed it up. That'll ensure that all records are captured and that nothing is skipped in the process. It's not essential. Sage, over the years has gotten very forgiving about that, but it's still a best practice to ensure that users are out of the system when you're doing a copy. And for those of you that don't know about the Master Console is an easy way to see who's in at any given time in the system, as well in what company and what application. So before you copy, if you need to identify who's in and ask them to get out, you can use the Master Console to see that. You could actually broadcast to users from here as well. However, the broadcast is only as good as people being sitting at their desk to actually see it. So I could see it's just me in the system. I'm going to go ahead and do my copy. Let me bring up my historical. So to do a copy, I'm just going to hit the copy button on the far right here. And it's going to warn me that I'm copying over an archive company. I'm going to say yes, because I'm creating the data. At this point, I don't even have anything to copy over. And here I'm going to pick the source company. And the source company is going to be the company, your live company that you are creating the backup from. So something that I do for myself every time is I'm going to repeat out loud, source company, DEM, going to destination company H24, just because I want to be certain that I'm copying in the right direction, that I'm not copying a empty company over my live production. And that is the danger here. So this is something that, may or may not be benign. And again, this may be something that you would ask VBCC to do for you, to create it, or someone internally that has access to this, or if you have access yourself, you can do it. But I will just say, please proceed with caution. Now, the system gives you one more opportunity to double check yourself. I'm going to say yes, down H24. And I'm going to say, yes, I want to do my copy. And with the demo data, the copy's pretty quick. And I accept that. You close out of here. And now if I go in. So now I have a full historical backup. With all my data, my sales order, purchase order history, everything here. One other step in the process to ensure the integrity of the historical data before moving forward with purging is if you did want to ensure that no one would go in there and use it as a test company or do any transactions in that company, you could create a role assigned to that company that is inquiry or read-only access. So that would ensure that no one could actually get in and accidentally do any posting or any transactions that might affect the data integrity. Okay. So now I have a historical backup. Now I have the history of everything as it is of that snapshot. And now I can start to move forward with my purging process. So I'm going to go back into my live environment and think about the purging. Now, I had mentioned earlier that being very conservative, I would also make a full backup of the Sage database prior to doing any significant purging. If I'm just, if I'm deleting a few things, some open sales orders that have expired, that type of thing, I may not do that. I may just rely on the historical backup in the event that I have to print it out and re-enter it, the sales order that is. But if I'm doing extensive purging, years of history, items possibly, I would recommend making a full system backup. Now, everyone's system is going to be a little different and where your Sage is located. This, I highly recommend contacting either your IT provider or us to assist with. But I would go in and just make myself a and I'm not going to ask you to remember these paths or anything, but just know that we have a Mass 90 folder that needs to be backed up so we can copy this to another location. We can zip it up. We can have a full backup made from your IT provider, whatever you're comfortable with, just to make sure that if we ever, for whatever reason, the system crashed during the purge, something we didn't do the historical backup, we purged, we didn't have any history to go back, nothing to reference, we could always restore it. So while that's going, I'll let that finish up. And that ensures that I have a full system backup as well. And then, as part of my purging routine, I'm gonna, after I've determined how many years I want to purge or how much I want to keep, I also look at the files that are most impacted by large data sets, which would be your history files. So there are a few specific files or tables in Sage that tend to accumulate a lot of data, one being your inventory transaction history, your sales order quote history, your AR invoice history. So those tables tend to be the larger of all the historical files in Sage. I mean, some will get up there as well, but the focus that I've always had in the past has been primarily on those tables. So let me start with, because inventory is the one that tends to be the largest, because almost every module on the distribution side touches the inventory module: purchase order, sales order, RMA, bill of materials. Your manufacturing modules are all writing transactions into history for the items. So let's go into, oh, before I jump into the item, I do want to show you every module in Sage 100 has a control for history, how many years of history you want to keep. Inventory is the only one that's not kept under the inventory module. Inventory is kept under common information. So if I go into common information, set up common information options, this is where I tell the system how many years of item history I want to retain. Now, Sage by default, out of the box, requires that you keep 2 years worth of history. So I don't think I can go below 2 on this. So I can't go below 2. So the default in most modules when you install Sage is always to have the 2 years as the default, and then we have the ability to come in and add to that. So each module will have their own option controls in terms of how much history you want to keep. I mean, I personally like to be consistent across the board, with maybe one exception being general ledger, which we may retain indefinitely. But that's certainly a business decision on your part, and you can control that on a module by module basis. So our inventory has been set to keep up to 5 years. So let's go look in inventory, item maintenance, and I want to show you where the inventory transactions show. Let me find my item here. So on your transactions tab in inventory is where you're going to see the transaction list. And this is every time you touch an item in Sage, it's going to write a transaction here, whether it be an adjustment, whether it be a sales order issue, an invoice, purchase order receipt, bill of material issue. It's all going to write in here as a transaction type. When I first open my transaction window, it's going to default to the current period, and I happen to be in 2025 for the demo data. So I'm going to just expand this out, and let's change this to all, and then I'm just going to show all transactions. So now this is going to populate with all the transactions I have for this item in the demo data. And you can see that I have basically 2025 and 2024. So if we looked at what our minimum requirement is, 2 years, I technically cannot purge any of this item history. But if it was beyond that, I certainly could remove anything from 2023 backwards, if that were the case. I'm going to show you, I'm going to do a little trick. This is something that I'm not going to say we put into practice on a regular basis, but for demonstration purposes, I want to be able to run a purge for you. So I'm just going to put this out for 2 years in the future. I'll change my module date. And this is going to allow me to basically trick the system so I can perform a purge. Now, where do we purge? Well, each module, inventory, sales order, purchase order, payables, receivables, they all have a utilities folder. And under the utilities folder is where you're going to find the purge. And again, this is controlled by permission. So, this is not accessible to everyone, This should be limited to the few people in the organization that, have the appropriate authority to do the purging, and also who you trust to do the purging. So here, I mean, in inventory, there's really only, for the most part, just the purge item history. And that's that transaction tab we just looked at. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, where do I want to purge? I want to purge all item history on or before the year 2024. So because I tricked the system, it's going to allow me to do this. I see, do you want to move on to history 2024? I'm going to say yes. Okay. And now when I go back in and look at the transaction history for that item we looked at, I should only see or only have available 2025 data. So, but before I do that, let me put myself back in the appropriate period. So back to our item. Now, if we look at history, I'm just change this back to all. And you can see I've removed all the 2024 records except for one, which is basically the transaction that was created that shows we did the purge. In transaction history, the transaction type, IX, indicates that we did a purge. And because we are a FIFO item, it does create a 1 cent transaction here so that we maintain a tier to create beginning balances and be able to move forward. So that's a Sage thing that happens, but this is going to show that we did a purge. Now, one other place that I can check, so if I'm ever doing a forensic and I want to know why something was purged or maybe who purged, purges at any level right into the system activity log. And the system activity log is located also under Library Master, under Reports. And then you can see, let me just open this up. Under today's date, I have CI item purge, history utility complete for 2024. And then the system does some recalculating of the balances based on that purge. And then you can also see where that I changed the item parameters too. So that's also, so the system activity log is a good audit trail just to see what's going on, what has happened in the system if something happens unexpected that you need to do maybe a little forensic research on. But I wanted to show you that we do track all that. So the next place that because I like to keep my years available for reporting purposes all consistent, I would probably not only purge item, even if the item was just the one data file that was getting out of control, and maybe that was just the one I absolutely had to, but just to be consistent so that we don't have mismatch in reporting, I would recommend that you do, the equivalent in all the other distribution modules, meaning sales order, purchase order, all the other modules that touch inventory, to ensure that you're playing in the same time period. So under purchase order, now different than item maintenance, or excuse me, the item where CI item is where you set the history. Everywhere else, you'll see the history is set under the module options. So purchase order, there's a couple of things to show you here. So the history, this is going to say, hey, how many years of history do you want to keep? Purchase history for your items, your vendors, whether or not you even want to retain purchase order history. And then you have some flexibility as to whether you want to just automatically save it, or do you want to prompt the user to save a deleted purchase order, or even a deleted line from a purchase order. So in the demo data, we have that set to prompt. If you just want it to be automatic, you would set that to yes. The number of years we're going to retain history, and also the ability to choose whether or not to retain receipt history. For those of you who've been on the system a long time, know that Sage, up until, I don't know if it was 5 years or 6 years ago, we didn't have purchase history. We only had receipt history. So purchase history is relatively new. The other thing I would like to point out to you on purchase order options is the number of days to retain a completed purchase order. So this is your open purchase order view, so that currently purchase order, even after it's been fully received and fully invoiced and is completed, will stay in the open until it purges, and that purge date is driven by the number of days here. So whether that be 30 days, 990 days, or 999, that's the max we can do. And that's the number of days it'll stay in the open after it is fully received and fully invoiced, or in essence completed. And then the system, as part of period end, will purge on its own. So we'll keep that at 30. So let's go in and look at our open purchase orders. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we do have a couple of older purchase orders out here that we can purge. So this open purchase orders, the purchasing process is governed by that date that we just updated, the number of days to keep completed purchase orders, but this can be overridden so that any time you can go in and purge completed purchase orders, just to kind of clean up the open file. And now, because we have purchase order history, we don't lose anything by doing this. So let's go in, and what we're going to do is we'll get rid of the two 2024 purchase orders that we have. And again, under purchase order, all the purge utilities are located under the utilities folder. And we have the purge completed purchase order option, which is going to say, hey, go out and anything that is fully received, fully invoiced, purge it based on this date. Now, this isn't going to purge open, nor is it going to purge back order status POs. It's just going to purge eligible POs that are fully completed. And then you just can do it by date. And it's just going to remove all the completed POs by that date. The purge expired master repeating orders, that's going to be for if you have master POs, if you have repeating POs, there is an expiration date that gets added to the PO header. This will purge based on that PO date. So you can decide whether you're going to do master, repeating, both, and then what is the date for that. The one purchase I'd like to focus on for today is the purge obsolete purchase orders. Now, this will purge both completed and back ordered purchase orders if certain criteria is met. So completed simply is if it's completed and it falls under this date, it's going to purge it. If it is back ordered, and for those of you who know and have gone through the exercise of reconcile your purchases clearing, and cleaning up the PO file is not that easy, or hasn't been that easy, to go in and deal with the back order purchase orders in order to get the purchase order clearing count to reconcile with GL. So that whole cleanup process has been time consuming. It's a lot of work. This is not the the perfect solution, but it does a great job. It will remove a large number of eligible POs so that hopefully there's only a handful left that need to be manually adjusted. So let's go in. We're going to do, we'll purge by December 31st, 2024. Now I can do a range of POs too within this date. So I do have more control. So in addition to the date being the cutoff, I can also exclude a range or only include a range. So I can use various operands to kind of further, enhance my selection so that I'm not looking at everything. And if it's taken a long time, maybe this is a way to do it in chunks. But in our case, let's go ahead and proceed. And it's going to ask me, yeah, do you want to do this? Yes. Now in my system, I do have a cancellation prompt comes up. I'm just going to say customer cancel. And this could obviously be something more meaningful because these are older POs we're cleaning up. Now, so how does that work? So that utility for the back order POs is going to look at the purchase order date, make sure that it's within the date that we set. So the purchase order date, the last receipt date, the last issue date, the last purchase order date, and the last invoice date. It's a lot of dates, but that's the criteria that the system uses to say, hey, if those dates are less than the date I entered into the delete, it's going to purge all those out. So those are eligible. And that prevents a technically open PO from being removed in this process. So let's go back here, back to purchase order entry. And now you can see my 2024 POs are now purged. So this is just that particular utility is extremely helpful in just cleaning up the open purchase order file for those, that of you who may have, thousands out there, 10,000s. I've been working on one myself that had like 26,000. So very helpful in that cleanup process. That'll allow me to get things back to where they should be so that I can get a good number in my purchases clearing, which is ideally our receive not invoice GL account, right? So that's our liability. And if we have all our POs closed up, that makes it easier to reconcile to the GL. And then at some point, the other option then is here is the purchase order history itself. That we can purge, receipt history, purchase history by item vendor. That's those period-based lookups that you'll see, or if you go into the item and on the history tab, that information is governed by the history by item by vendor. So if we've been on the system since 2010 and we are only going to keep from 2017 forward, right? I would recommend that we do all the files to the same, the same period of time. Just so that you have consistency, that there's not this outlier that you see data and you don't have it available in a corresponding report, and then it just leads to questions. So just so that we stay consistent and our reporting stays consistent. And again, this is the purchase order history is driven by the date, the receipt history, we'll get rid of everything for non-existent purchase orders. So that one may be one that's a little more not as benign, and maybe that one we might consider just holding off on. The history by item by vendor, that's based on date driven, and you can do it by posting date or receipt date. Typically those are the same, but in some cases there may be, depending on your process, there may be some difference in the two. So those are our purchase order. Now let's talk a little bit about sales orders. And again, in the sales order entry under the sales order setup, our history tab looks very similar to the purchase order history tab. So we have the number of years that we can save history. We have the ability to retain deleted sales orders, quotes, and history. And you have the option of whether to prompt for that, automatically save it, or don't save it at all. I don't care to save, deleted quotes. I don't want to track that, but you have that option. Our number of years is 5. It's consistent with what we had in the PO. And then just like in the purchase order, under our utilities, we have the ability to purge expired orders, quotes. Now, the expired orders and quotes is driven by the date. So I want to do price quotes. And then again, I set the date. And that would be driven by on the sales order itself. The expiration date. So as long as the quote has an expiration date less than the date you put in at the purge utility, it's going to remove it out of the open sales order file. Now that quote still exists in history. So if you ever had to copy it back or recreate it, it is there to copy back. So you don't really lose anything by doing that. And it does clean up your open sales order files. So I think, sorry, I shouldn't have closed out of that. Let me get back in there. I wanted to. All right, so we have some older quotes out here. So let's go ahead and use that utility and we can purge those quotes. So those both have an order date of 2/26/2022 and an expiration date of 11/21. So if we do the utility, we're going to just do in this circumstance, just expired price quotes, but the same as functionality is that the rules are still the same based on whether it's a master order or repeating order. It's driven by the ship expire date. So let's go anything 23. Okay. And now if you can see, I've gotten rid of all those or those 3 open quotes we had that were expired. Now, obviously in the demo data with only doing 3 doesn't have a lot of bang for its buck, but if this was, you had thousands for a year, you could see that this utility would be very helpful in removing a lot of data all at once. I can also get rid of old sales orders. So based on the date, and these include back order sales orders, open sales orders, based on the date that we put in here. So anything less than, if we ran this for 2022, I'm going to get rid of all open sales orders 2022 and less. So another way to help you clean up that open sales order file. I think those tend to be the 2 that become the largest. This, for those of you that have operations management, this will also get rid of, clean up the work tickets. So it'll delete the work tickets first, and then it will delete the sales order. So you don't get that anything phantomed or any hanging out work tickets that are disassociated from the sales order. So it does both. So we have our obsolete sales orders. We can purge history. Now, sales order quote history is another one that will get rather large. And because we do accumulate both quotes, active orders, and completed orders all live in that file. So it can become, over the course of time, becomes one of the larger tables. And that is one that's typically good to purge for. And you probably notice that when you do go back and look at the sales order quote history inquiry, it takes a while to load those lookups. That tends to be one of the larger because there's so many records that get written into that file. Obviously here with 21, it's not a big deal, but this could be hundreds of thousands depending on how long it's been since you've purged. And clean that up will significantly speed up your lookup process, your reporting process. So there's some great advantage to that. Next one is accounts payable. And really in accounts payable, and again, I'll just common theme here, but we have our same very similar history tab set up, but again, number of years to retain vendor history, number of years to retain 1099 payments. And you can see just for consistency, I've kept everything at 5 years. And then the utilities for available to purge in the accounts payable are you have the ability to remove your accounts payable history. And so we have the ability, along with purchase history, to also do invoice and payment history. These can be run independently, or they can be run both at the same time. The invoice is date driven. The vendor purchase history is year driven, or in this case, fiscal year. But if you're on calendar year, this is your calendar year driven. This removes the period type report buckets, and this removes your open payables or your payables history and payment history. And then in addition, I can do my 1099 payment history, sales tax history on the AP side. If you were going to do, one other thing I wanted to point out here is there is now the ability in the utilities to remove inactive vendors. And there's also, when you'll see in a minute, the ability to remove inactive customers. So this is independent of our delete change utility. The rules in the case of the vendors is that there can be no open invoices, no, any bounce. So any open transactions related to that vendor will prevent you from removing it. But if a vendor is fully paid, if it has been fully paid, no open transactions, and is marked as inactive, that utility will remove that vendor. And that is a little faster than having to use the delete change utility, because there's some additional rules for the delete change utility. I'm going to quickly touch on accounts receivable. I won't show you the options, pretty much the same. I don't want to bore you with the same.
Greg, can I interrupt real quick?
Absolutely.
Somebody asked, is there an order of modules to purge first?
So I tend to follow the old period end processing rules. So the way you perform period end processing is you start at PO. So you go PO, sales order, inventory, payables, receivables. And it's not a, Sage doesn't care in this case. In period end, it does. It just happens to be, to me, it's the logical sequence. Just, go up the ladder and purge through to the retention period you've decided to purge to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more question while we're on vendors. If an inactive vendor is tied to an open PO, are you able to delete the inactive vendor?
No, any open transaction will prevent that utility from purging. And the
Perfect.
PO, the PO would be a link. Sage is smart enough to see that and it wouldn't disassociate that on you.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, and I will be, actually what we'll do is we'll finish up on a couple more real quick. I want to leave enough time for questions. I know there's a lot to this, but it's, once you get into the groove, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so accounts receivable. The accounts receivable invoice history file are another one of those tables that become extraordinarily large over the course of time. Everything is invoice, every credit, every invoice from sales order, from AR invoices, all right into that table. It's a good reporting tool, that table. So it is, in many cases, keeping it, purged and at a manageable amount of years is extremely helpful in reporting, because you're not pulling all that data. The way Sage uses Crystal, and when you run a Crystal report, the way it works is it looks at every record in the table when you run the report. So dependent of, say, I only want to run for 2024, you still have to cycle through every year of history that you have in that table in order to get to the 2024 record. So there is almost always a performance improvement in reporting when you do your purging. And that is my purge accounts receivable history. And there's a few options here. So there's the ability to, we're going to remove invoice history. So we can get rid of just deleted, or we can say, hey, I want to get rid of the deleted, plus I want to get rid of everything else. And then I'm going to do it based on a specific date. Now, remember the 2-year rule does apply here. Most of the, in all the history, Sage as a business rule, forces you to keep a minimum 2 years. So the current year and the prior year. And then along with my invoices, I can remove deposit history, customer sales history, your salesperson history, cash receipt history, and you see the theme. So you can do it independently. You can do it all at once. I didn't mention before when we were talking about the sales order quotes, but in these tables that tend to be the larger size tables, we may not want to take all the years all at once. Meaning, if we're going to purge back 5 years, we may take it 1 year at a time, just because the amount of time it takes to do the purge. Sometimes it's more efficient to do it in segments versus trying to do it all at once. But this is really the important one in the invoice side, on the AR side. And just show you that AR also has the remove inactive customers. And again, this requires that you flag the customers being inactive in customer maintenance, and there are no open transactions for that customer, and this will and then the proceed, and that will remove them. So again, another way to, faster, streamline ways to help you clean up your database. So your customers, your vendors, items, we don't have, for inventory items, we don't have that particular luxury. There isn't that easy utility. For inventory items, you do have to use, I'll just show you before you do have to use the delete change utility. And this one, there are rules for this. We can't run the delete change when you have, any open transactions on the distribution modules. So open invoices, any unposted receipt of goods, inventory transactions, everything has to be posted just to open this particular utility. This utility does a great job of cleaning up items. Again, the 2-year rule applies. So if an item has had history within the last 2 years, we're not going to be able to delete it. There's a workaround for that. We can renumber it, but we won't be able to delete it. The one trick here is if you have a bunch of deletes to do, we can import into this table so that you can load the utility, the user interface. You can load that through VI while processing is happening in your system. However, to run it, you'll have to have everything posted to open it up and run it. But you can get it ready to go so that when you do have the opportunity to run it and you have that moment in time when everything's posted, it's there. All you have to do is go in and run. This one can take a little while. I've had customers that it takes up to 4 minutes per item. So this is one that you might consider doing in increments as well. All right. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on, because we talked about backups. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do a backup because everybody has a little bit of a different process for backing up and different tools. However, I do want to say that, backups are extremely important. Backups protect against human errors, hardware failures, virus attacks, which we know are pretty common these days, power failures, natural disasters. So the backup is your best friend in the world of software, because it always gives you the ability to go back. And now, the important thing is making sure your backup works, and this is what I want to touch on today. I know probably most of you either have someone on the outside that's responsible for your backup, an IT provider, or you have an internal IT staff that manages your backups. If you're cloud hosted, that's usually an automatic process as well. However, it's a best practice on a predefined basis to test that backup to make sure whether it's annual, whether it's every 6 months, whatever that happens to be. I'm going to highly recommend that you test that your backup works, that you can restore, at any given time to a certain point. So if you take one thing away from this, please, reach out and have your backup tested. We can't tell you. We just had a situation here at VBCC where one of our customers was, attacked, and unfortunately the backup didn't work, and basically we had to build the system back out from scratch. So you can only imagine the pain involved in that. And that's my spiel on that. I won't preach it anymore, but please, backups are absolutely critically important. And if you have any questions on what needs to be backed up, please reach out to your VBC consultant. You can reach out to myself. You can reach out to Kelly. Any one of us will get you that information, or we'll get on and if your IT person needs to know what specifically needs to be backed up, we'll have that conversation.
All right, I have one more question here. Does operations management need to be purged prior to sales order?
No, because the operations management, most of the data being stored, other than the specific operation management files, work tickets are linked to the sales order. So the sales order utilities, when you purge them, will also purge the work tickets. But any history purging you can do. I mean, if we're going to follow our sequence, I'm going to say climb the ladder. So operations management prior to sales order, purchase order, inventory, just to kind of give you a pattern to follow.
So I'd like to quickly thank Greg for his time today and putting this all together. Of course, we are recording this, so it will be posted on our website, our YouTube channel coming up here soon. And of course, thank you to everybody who attended. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you spending a little bit of it with us. I'll be sending an email out to everybody for CPE credit if you need that, and we'll go from there. Otherwise, everybody have a great month or a great day, and until next month. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Much appreciated.